I'm putting myself basically into debt. I need to find a job. I had an opportunity to join Amplitude. It would mean that I'd have to move the family up from Los Angeles to San Francisco. We ended up having to take out a loan from my wife's parents so we could afford to make the move. She ended up having to go in-house so that we could afford a place, which she hated that job. I was literally at one point in time splitting the living room of a apartment complex with some employees to try to save money.
All right, that is my guest today, Justin Bauer. He's the former chief product officer at Amplitude. And as you just heard, he joined Amplitude under crazy circumstances in the really early days, right after they closed their Series A when there was like 13 people. He had over an 8-year run there. And today, he's become one of the most sought after product advisors in the AI space. So our conversation was all about the speed bumps, the adversity that he encountered along the way. So in our conversation, we talked about a few of these tough moments, what it really looks like to go all in and bet everything on an early stage startup. We talked about how to manage up when you're reporting to a new CEO who's young and hasn't done their job before and you haven't done your job before. We talked about what it takes to survive in an early stage company that's growing rapidly when your job's changing every 18 months and you're looking around and all the people around you are getting leveled or replaced along the way. We got into a lot of it. Probably my favorite part of this conversation was when Justin described this insane meeting where his CEO basically brought up this conversation where one of his peers and the leadership team was having some grievance with him. And the CEO basically asked him to hash it out in front of the other members of the leadership team. It's a crazy story. I don't think I can do it justice in this intro. So I hope you listen to this episode. You can hear it straight from him. Let's jump into my conversation with Justin Bauer.
I grew up in a small town, Iowa, called Altoona. I was the oldest of 5 children, primarily raised by my mom, my grandmother, because my dad's work meant that he traveled a lot. So he'd be gone 3 to 6 months at a time. And so it was a lot of us kids kind of raising each other.
And what did dad do? What was he traveling around doing for 3 to 6 months at a time?
He was a marine engineer. He worked on an oil, like a ship that basically looked for oil all around the world. Basically self-made person, also oldest of 5, didn't go to college, but he was a mechanic and found this opportunity to do this.
Very cool.
It was funny. I remember growing up, when you're a kid, it's all normal for you. I was playing with some friends and they were like, oh, my dad's coming home today. And I was like, today's the day your dad's coming home? And they're like, yeah, he comes home every day. And like, and so like, you just don't realize things are growing up with their difference. But yeah, it was pretty funny.
And so with 5 kids, is your mom working or is she head of the household?
Yeah, so she's a stay-at-home mom and also getting help from grandma who lived pretty close as well.
And being the oldest of 5, are you also taking care of your siblings or are you just like a kid? I'm always kind of curious about that.
Yeah, no, for sure. It definitely was a lot, especially with my dad just being gone so much. And then when they got divorced, I mean, it was really just single mom. And so at that stage, I'm spending a lot of time with the kids. But I think I look back at, there's a lot of lessons in that. And it was interesting. I always kind of learned how to help and kind of lead because I felt like that was just my role and responsibility within the family.
And what age did your folks get divorced?
I think it was around 6th grade.
I think my folks got divorced basically at the same age. I think I was maybe like 4th grade. And so it changes things, right? So when you're a kid and there's a big change in the family, I also was the oldest. I feel like I also kind of played that role, though I didn't have 5 siblings in my family. So like that resonates with me. And so take us back in time. So you're living in small town Iowa. Your dad is traveling. You've got 4 younger siblings. Like, what are you into? Are you into sports? Are you into entrepreneurship? Are you into math? Like, take us back in time to understand maybe some of the things that might have led you to the version that I get to meet today.
Definitely into sports. I played baseball. Athletics ends up being a pretty important part of my life. On the schooling front, that was the other thing that I think my mom really ingrained in me of like, hey, if you want to make something of yourself, schooling is going to be how you do that. I think, with a family, like I said, I was first to go to college. I think for her, she really saw that as like, this is going to be my way to do something more than just kind of grow up in rural Iowa. And so those 2 things, I would say schooling and athletics probably were the core focus areas for me kind of growing up.
Do you remember your first job? Like, I don't know with 4 younger siblings if you had time for a job, but if you do, I always love to ask folks what their first job or 2 were.
So my very first job was actually picking strawberries when I was 13, because you could do that and not have to be old enough to actually like officially be employed. So my mom randomly found some like farmer that I could do that for. And then my next job was actually working at an amusement park, and so called Adventureland. So making food there. We're pretty poor, and so I needed to actually make some cash. So I spent a lot of my summers to work in multiple jobs.
If we could talk to that version of you, what did you think you would grow up to be?
What I did know was that I didn't want to be in Iowa. There wasn't anything that like really resonated with me. I do remember at one point in time, so I would argue a lot with my mom, and eventually she's like, oh, you should be a lawyer. So I was like, okay, cool. So lawyer could be a thing. And I was like, well, the best way to figure out if this would be a thing is I should actually go try it out. And so I ended up getting an internship this summer before I went to college at a law firm, where I learned that I did not want to be a lawyer, which I'm very thankful
not much
for.
Fun.
Yeah, it really wasn't that much. And so I've had multiple examples where I tried something, learned it is not the thing that I want.
Sometimes there's a direct line where it's like your parents were entrepreneurs, you grow up to become an entrepreneur. In your case, you don't have, at least in the folks that you've shared with me so far, there's no role models, it sounds like, that are into tech, that are into the startup space. So how do we bridge that version of you that you're telling me about here, interested maybe becoming a lawyer? How do you take your first few steps into this world that you eventually kind of grow your career around?
So I ended up finding myself in San Francisco. That was probably the real turning point. Basically, my first job out of undergrad was in the Bay Area. I moved out to San Francisco thinking I was going to get my PhD in economics. And that's what I ended up doing in undergrad. I worked with an economic consulting firm and learned that's not what I want to do. And I was like, well, maybe we'll just go back to school. And so I got lucky enough to get into Stanford Business School. And that was where I really started to explore more deeply in tech.
Yeah, I was curious if there's like a moment or a time that kind of set your career on its current trajectory. And it sounds like it might be that. That might be the moment.
I think going to Stanford, where I didn't even heard of the concept of private equity, I like kind of knew what a VC was. I didn't know what a product manager was. Like I knew nothing about it. And so it was fascinating to me just to talk to classmates who all had done these roles. And I think I eventually learned more about the product management function. And I was like, hey, this actually does sound like something I could potentially be good at. It's interesting. I go out and end up doing 6 interviews for summer PM internships and get rejected from all of them, which I'm very thankful for, because I think it was one of those moments where you realize that if there's something you want, you got to work hard for it. But I did want to work in tech and managed to get a job as a data scientist at Yahoo, which was great. Also helped me learn that I don't want to work in a large organization in tech. Like I think all of those were journeys into me exploring tech and the impact I can have.
This episode is presented by Navattic. If you've been following me or you're a fan of this show, you know how bullish I am on the interactive demo space and how much I love the Navattic team. Done a ton of stuff with them over the years, and they just dropped a bunch of new features that are really exciting. First, they've got a new template library. You can choose from a bunch of pre-made templates that have the most common demo use cases and all of the best practices built in, help you go 0 to 1 in a few seconds. If you're not sure what to build, they also have a new AI storyboard generator. It's exactly how it sounds. You drop in a website URL or some copy or a landing page, whatever you've got, it reads the information, pulls out the key sections, and then builds a working product demo for you in a couple minutes. And after you've built your demo, you'll probably want to use your data as part of your go-to-market approach. They've got a bunch of plug-and-play demo playbooks where you can send that interaction data to your CRM. You can use it to trigger alerts, all kinds of good stuff. It's actually a bunch of the things that my team built manually. It took us forever when I was in-house. So I love this. And after you've built your demo, if you need to make any adjustments, if you're displaying numbers or data as part of that, they have a new table AI feature, which helps you to clean up that data in a more conversational way and at scale in just a few seconds. They have made it so stinking easy to use your product as your marketing tool without needing an engineer or heavy design work. You can get started with all of this in their free plan. Check it out at navattic.com/value to get started. That's navattic.com/value. This episode of the show is presented by my friends at ThriveStack. They're making it super easy for growth teams to track their entire growth model in one place. And if you work at a SaaS company, you know how hard that is. I always wanted to see what was going on across the whole model, from awareness through acquisition and activation, through to retention, conversion, expansion, and upsell. I always wanted to have access to it in one place, but it was nearly impossible. Everything was siloed and disjointed, and I had to work with the BI engineers to consolidate like 8 different data sources into one place. The process was slow, it was inflexible, And to make a small change, I needed to create another ticket, which got added to the backlog. That's why I'm so excited to be partnering with ThriveStack. They're an analytics platform specifically designed for growth teams. They combine all those disjointed data sources into one single view of the customer journey. They automatically flag the drop-offs, friction points, and leaks, and they have built-in alerting thresholds so you can avoid those, hey, what happened to this random metric last week? Slack messages that I used to get used to drive me crazy from my execs. They're specifically made for growth teams. They have a very generous free plan, and I've had the chance to take a peek under the hood at what they're building and what's on their roadmap, and I'm so impressed. Check them out for yourself at thrivestack.ai. Once again, that is thrivestack.ai. And so you go on from Yahoo, most recently when you were in-house, you were CPO at Amplitude. I know now you're advising different companies. I want to go back in time and double click on some of the tough moments and the speed bumps and the lessons that come from that. So maybe take us back in time. Let's talk about one of the harder career decisions that you've had to make along the way here. What comes to mind as I ask that? And what was at stake for you?
Yeah, so actually joining Amplitude was a pretty pivotal and extraordinarily difficult decision and time for me and my family. So the context before that, so I had started a company prior to joining Amplitude. I had raised a little bit of money. The company was doing okay. I had realized that gaming really wasn't the place I wanted to build my career on. So decided that I wanted to sell the studio. And it took a while to do that.
What was the business? I feel like you're describing around it, but what was the business that you had started before in the gaming space, I assume?
So it was a daily fantasy sports game. And this is back in like 2011, 2012. So kind of the early days of that. We were the first to bring daily fantasy to mobile. And yeah, it was started honestly as a side project with a friend of mine. And then we realized that there was actually potentially a real business model behind it. So we go and quit our jobs and go start the company. So I'm in the process of deciding to sell it. I ultimately I loved gaming, but the economics of gaming, I didn't feel like that was where I wanted to really build my career. But it takes a while to sell the studio and we're out of money. So now I'm putting myself basically into debt to do this. And we eventually do successfully sell it, but myself as a founder, I don't get any of the money back. It's basically just get investors' money back. And so now I'm like, I need to find a job and have an offer to go join with a former partner of mine, a more corporate job. My wife's kind of really pushing me to do that. We're living in LA at the time. There's not a lot of kind of startup opportunities, but I still really love startups. And I really want to see if I can continue to potentially build my career in startups. And so kind of saw this as my last shot at doing it. I had an opportunity to join Amplitude. It would mean that I'd have to move the family up from Los Angeles to San Francisco. We ended up having to literally had to take out a loan from my wife's parents so we could afford to make the move. She ended up having to, she was a consultant at the time. She ended up having to go in-house so that we could afford a place, which she hated that job. We downsized by half. I was literally at one point in time, like splitting the living room of a apartment complex with some employees to try to save money, like while the family was moving up. So it was a pretty big bet on a company that was, 13, 14 people.
I was going to ask. Yeah, I was going to say, because I looking at your LinkedIn, it was back in 2015. I was trying to imagine where Amplitude or what Amplitude might have looked or felt like at that time.
Yeah. So Amplitude was $1 million in ARR, just raised the Series A.
Oh man. So super early.
I was literally the only person who was in their 30s at the company. So it is very early. It is a huge bet, but I also I had the conviction that this felt right. The team, I loved the team. And I'm a big believer that you got to take those leaps of faith sometimes. And I'm very, very thankful that I did. But it was tough and it was painful for a while.
I think there's a lot of folks listening to this. My audience are folks who typically work at early stage startups, scale ups, probably some of them at that stage, or maybe they're working at a larger company, but they're craving more impact. I bet many of them can listen to this story and relate to how it must feel to make a bet like this. You put all your chips basically on one hand. What's your advice to someone who's going through that, whether they're debating making a leap, maybe they just made a leap and now they're asking themselves like, am I out of my fucking mind? What's your advice for someone who's in that situation today?
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up the poker analogy. So I'm a poker player myself.
Okay.
And I think it's a calculated bet. And so it's not a blind faith leap. And so going back to even the Amplitude example, like I believed in Amplitude and in the space and had actually been an early customer of their biggest competitor. So I knew the space quite well and believed that we could build an amazing product if we worked together. So even with all that, there's a ton of risk. But I share this feedback to people who are thinking about joining Series A, feedback that someone gave me, which is you need to think about it kind of like a venture capitalist would, which is like, this is your one bet. And you need to take that amount of time to really understand the space, understand the people. I did a lot of time. I met every single person at Amplitude before I joined. So I did as much data gathering as one could, and then had to make the decision. I'm like, I'm going all in. And then you have to go all in. And so that's the other side of it. I see people who will kind of, they're like, I want to go work in startups. So they'll just jump in. And I'm like, okay, well,
right.
Probably a little premature. And then there's a lot of entrepreneurs who will spend a lot of time doing the research and never actually put their chips in the middle. And so I think it's both. Certainly that doesn't guarantee success, but I think there are a few moments in your career where you need to do that. And this was at least one of them for me.
Yeah, I talked to a ton of folks who don't really do the diligence. They glorify or romanticize what it might look like to go to an early stage company, especially I feel like in the mid 2010s, like when there was a lot of money going around and working at a startup was sort of a glamorous, sexy thing to tell people who are like in your life that didn't know this world. And most of those folks just cannonball in with no idea about what they're getting into or how to do due diligence, or that it's okay that they call their own interview rounds to interview the team and not just be interviewed. And so for anyone listening to this, I think that those are great takeaways. Did you learn anything else? Like, again, these are my words, not yours, but trying to recap what I heard you say. Did you learn anything else that you get to take with you that we want to highlight for other folks listening?
I mean, talking about like folks, like how kind of startups were this glamorized thing. And I think this is shifting a bit now, which I'm actually happy about. But the other side of it is it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And so like in those early days, like I'm in the office till midnight. And I think when you're an early stage startup, it's like, one, I think that should actually be the expectation. And you can accomplish crazy things with all that time. But also, that's not the right fit for most people.
Right.
Right. And that is a family decision. And so, like, because that has a big impact on everyone else around you. And so I think a lot about that. And there are times where it made no sense at all. Like I think about when I had my daughter, like, that's not a good time to go join a startup. like other things need to be the priority. And so I think that's another thing that's really important. You have to, like, when people ask me this, I really say like, okay, I want you to have a real clear picture of what it actually is going to be like so that you're prepared for that. And then you can make that decision. So you're not caught off by surprise in thinking that it's not as much work as it will be, because it's a lot. And that may be the only competitive advantage you have as a startup is the fact that you're working harder than the incumbents that you're trying to compete with.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of that going on right now in the AI space, right? They're building very similar stuff using very similar proprietary, well, the technology, I guess, is not so proprietary. And the main thing is like speed, effort, hustle, and output. And I think there's a lot of folks that are in that today, grinding it out a little bit.
Which I think is great. And I think the most important thing about this is they're being explicit about it. I think the challenge that I saw was that it was, people were like, oh no, work-life balance is great. And then the reality is then when you joined, it wasn't. Versus if you're just up front, you're like, yeah, we work every night till 9 p.m. and we work some weekends. For many people, that's not the right job for them, but at least they know. Yeah. And you can self-select in or out. So I actually appreciate the fact that most startups now are upfront about that. And like I said, joining a startup is not for everyone. So you really got to figure out this is the right stage and time for you.
So switching gears a little bit, one of the other things that I get to talk to a lot of different folks about is feedback. I'm going to chat with a lot of folks that are in senior growth roles that have some feedback that either they take with them or it hits kind of their core, or it's something that kind of makes them question their identity. I'm curious for you, what's been a piece of feedback that you've received along the way that you still think about today? What comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I think a lot about the feedback that I was given, actually, that helped me get into the tech world and the startup world. So I was leaving McKinsey and I really wanted to go into startups. And I was living in Los Angeles, as I mentioned, and I was struggling. There were not that many startups in LA at the time. I think Snapchat maybe just raised their Series B. And every single time, like, that I could even get to a screen, I would get rejected. I managed to meet with the kind of leading VC in this guy named Will Su from Mucker Labs, one of the leading VCs.
Oh, I know Will. That's
Will.
Funny. Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Okay, I love Will. So if you know Will, then you're probably not going to be surprised by how direct the feedback is that he gave me, which was he basically told me straight up, you're never going to get hired by a startup with the background you have. And if you really want to work in startups, then you need to go found your own company.
Was this like was this like, hey, could I informationally talk to you about startup stuff? Was he part of the hiring process for one of the companies? Like, how did you end up chatting with him?
No, I don't even remember how I managed to get intro to him, but he had no clue who I was. It was one of those, which I just love this about tech, the Valley in general. Like, I do the same thing. I would just reserve time to meet with folks. So same thing. Will has no reason to talk to me. And he was very blunt, which I think back to my time in Iowa, growing up in Iowa, where everyone's like very nice. And if there's someone you just meet for the first time, like, you tend not to be blunt. You tend to be super nice. And Will is just like, hey, I'm just going to try to be helpful. Like, the path you're going down is probably not going to work. And I'm so thankful for that, because it saved me from wasting a bunch of time, and actually was the spark that got me to eventually then 2 years later start a company. And Will was the first institutional investor in that company. And I think a lot about that for how I give people feedback now too, is to say, like, just be direct and be like, hey, there's a hard way and an easy way. And I think you might be trying the hard way. And so if I can help you, like, here's an opportunity to do easy mode, right? And you can make the choice.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying this episode of the show. If you are, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening on. The data shows something like 40% of the people who listen to the show are actually subscribed. It is the best way for you to support the show, and it helps the algorithm find other listeners who are just like you. If you're feeling generous, a quick rating or review makes a huge difference as well. Thank you so much for listening and for your support. Now let's get back to this episode. So in the moment, as you shared this, obviously I understand your reflection now with some time and space, but in the moment, was there like a, hey, fuck you kind of a feeling? Or from the get-go after he shared it, did you agree with him and you just decided to move forward with that in mind?
I think I'd been rejected enough that it wasn't a like, fuck you, what do you know? It was a like, yeah, I think you're actually right. I don't want to hear this, and I don't want to believe that, but I actually think this is probably right. And so that had me, I pivoted my search to things that would be startup adjacent, which would enable me to continue to get closer to that North Star. And then, like I said, eventually that helped inspire me to start exploring some side projects, that then one of which eventually became a startup.
Yeah, I was so curious because earlier in our combo, you said, sports have been a big part of my life. And I feel like there's no better motivation in sports anyways than when someone says like, oh, I don't think you're good enough. I don't think you're going to make this team. I don't think for me, you're tall enough, whatever it might be. So there's no better for me anyways, motivating thing in life than to try to prove a naysayer wrong. So I was curious if there was any of that energy brought to it. Sounds like no, but that's where I was coming from with the question.
Yeah, no, I think if you had told me I'm never going to work at a startup or I'm not startup material, that would have been different. I think he was like, hey, like, he was like, I don't know you, but you're probably super talented. But like, it's just, no one's going to take a bet on you. It's just not how startups work. And having worked at a startup, I totally understand it. It's like, you have a role, you want to hire, you have so much risk already. Like, you don't want to necessarily. Yeah. Now, I actually, later on, I did try to really invest in finding high slope individuals. I tried to find the folks that I felt like were similar to myself that you could really place a bet on. But I get how hard that is. And so it was actually good to hear.
Yeah. And so you mentioned that this moment kind of inspires you to give a similar gift to other folks, to not share or sugarcoat feedback when you're giving feedback to others. Can you recall like a specific time or piece of feedback where you felt like you were really direct with someone after this?
Yeah, for sure. So I remember years later, a friend of mine, his spouse actually wants to do something similar. She wants to go work at an early stage startup in San Francisco. They're living in Toronto at the time. And so I give not the direct feedback, actually, but similarly, I'm like, hey, here's hard mode and here's easy mode. And I actually use the analogy of the three-legged stool, which is, if you think about your career, you can think about it like with three different legs. One leg would be the industry you're in, what would be the function you're working in, and what would be the people that you know. Learned this at McKinsey. And like, she was working at a large bank in Toronto. I'm like, you're trying to jump in with no legs to the stool. And I think that's going to be hard mode. And so I would think about what are one or two legs to the stool that you could use to get yourself in and get started, and maybe then eventually find yourself where you wanted to be. And that, she tells me to this day, she's like, that was like the eye-opening piece of advice that I needed. She ended up looking in fintech startups, found this small fintech startup. You might have heard of them, called Stripe. And I think she's been there now for 10 years.
Wow.
And so, yeah, she's had a great career. But once again, just like trying to just be direct and like, hey, like what you're doing, I think that's hard mode. And let's see if we can find a way where we can play a little bit on easier mode. I was talking to someone who wants to get into PM, lives in Chicago, and is debating if they should move to San Francisco. And I think she wanted to hear that like it could work anywhere, because I had started in LA. That was not the advice I gave her. I said, doing it in Chicago is going to be hard mode. And so like in similar fashion, my career in tech didn't really take off till I moved to the Bay, and it was super painful and took a big risk. That would be my advice. If you want to be a PM, go and figure out how you can move yourself to San Francisco.
It's hard to get people in your life that shoot you straight like that. I feel like more people default to niceness or telling you the thing that you want to hear. And I truly think it takes a real friend sometimes, or not necessarily a friend, but like it takes someone who really cares to like shoot you straight or tell you the thing that maybe doesn't make you feel good for a second, but in the long run really helps you get there faster.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
And so tell me a little bit, like one of the other things that I'll hear often from folks is at some point they'll struggle with imposter syndrome. Obviously, everybody describes what that feels like differently. The way I think about it is times when you question if you really belong in your role. So for you, has there ever been a moment like that? If so, what triggered it?
Yeah, probably every 18 months in Amplitude. Honestly, felt like that.
And is that just because it's growing so quick? Like the team is changing, the company's hiring so quick? Is that sort of the...
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think those are the benefits of joining, they call it the rocket ship, whatever you want to call it, but joining a really fast growing company is the role does change literally every 12 to 18 months, but there's a huge challenge to that. And kind of that recognition of every single day, I'm now doing something I've never done before. And not just the recognition, but being open and honest about talking about that. That was a pretty big moment for me when I realized that I could actually be upfront and honest about that with my boss, the CEO, but that didn't come easily. So the first time, I remember about 18 months, maybe 2 years into the Amplitude journey, I kind of had this realization that every single person on the leadership team has been turned over, except for me.
In the context here is you're hired, you say you were the first PM?
Yes. Yeah.
And so for folks listening, typically the first usually comes in with like a head of title, and it's sort of like you're the head of for now, but if the company grows in the way that you hope, at some point you get leveled, right? At some point it outgrows the thing that you're special at. And so that this is what you're describing, right? So you look around, you see the other people that were kind of the head of their capabilities, and they're all slowly either getting leveled or replaced. Is
I'd
that
say
kind of the context?
half were leveled and half got replaced. So that is the context. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'm next. And I'm starting to kind of feel a bit of the pressure of like, I can see how Spencer is starting to really be much clearer in what his expectations are, Spencer the CEO, of me. We, recently raised a big round. We've got a new board member, like all these dynamics are happening. And so I kind of come to this realization that like, I really need to figure out what is the expectation of me at this next stage. As you talk to your boss about it, but the reality of a first-time founder is they're figuring it out too.
Right. They don't really know either. Right.
Yeah. And which does not play necessarily to your favor.
Somebody's got to have clarity, right? So yeah, if it's not you, it's not them, it's probably not going to work out well for you at some point.
It will. And I will tell you the default advice from every board member is to bring on senior leadership. That is the default advice. And so you're fighting against that. And so I'm like, well, I need to get to clarity, as he said. So like, what's the best way I can get to clarity? I need to go talk to a bunch of people who've had this role before. And so I do that. I actually, with a friend of mine, he was head of product division at the time. We actually created this breakfast club of senior SaaS product leaders where we get together maybe once every like 3 or 4 months. So like had an opportunity to learn from them, started just reaching out to folks on LinkedIn and also looking at our customers, and eventually met the CPO at Atlassian, this guy named Joff Redfern. And actually through sheer luck and persistence, convinced him to become my mentor. And that was a big changing moment for me because I could basically check a lot of these imposter syndrome moments with him. And that also helped give me more confidence in what the expectation was for this next stage. Enough confidence I could literally go to Spencer and effectively kind of write out what I thought the job description is for the next 18 months.
Yeah, kind of give him something to react to, kind of pitch it up. Yeah.
Exactly. And so we were able to use that as a roadmap, and it gave me something to kind of calibrate myself against. And it also gave me the confidence then to do that again another 18 months later, but much earlier, like, and say, hey, it feels like things are changing. What are your observations? And so we really created this, I think, relationship where we both kind of realized that we had to do this every 18 months. And so that actually brought us closer together because we knew we always had to reinvent ourselves. And it felt like a partnership between the two of us.
And was there ever a specific moment where you ask, or maybe he says like, hey, we're not going to hire someone above you. We're going to give you a leash to figure it out. Or are you always kind of waiting or working with that in the back of your mind?
It kind of sat in between, I think. And I think that's the right way to do it. So I think after this kind of round, we kind of came to clarity of like what it really means to be VP. Like, I think he said, and there was a moment where he's like, yeah, like this is like, I don't want you being worried about we're going to level you. Like, I'm investing in you and the belief that you will be the VP. But at the same time, he said, like, the reality is like the business will change, and all of us need to ask ourselves, are we doing the best job? And are we the best and the right leader for this stage? And so it wasn't a blank check, and nor do I think it should be, because things are going to move quickly. But we had a commitment to each other that if we ever saw it potentially the relationship ending in either direction, we would give each other a lot of heads up notice. That ended up making that decision eventually is actually through this exact same process. I was kind of like, I think maybe would have been the 6th or 7th transition or like evolution. And I came to the realization that I just did not have the energy to do that next evolution of myself. And so decided that that would be my, 23 would be my last year in Amplitude, but shared that with him at the beginning of the year. And so I think knowing that from either direction, like we would give each other a heads up notice, meant that I had trust that if he felt like I wasn't scaling, like I knew that he would come to me well ahead of a decision of actually like a level or something like that.
I'm going to use my words to describe what I just heard you share. I'm going to try to translate for the listeners. Tell me if you agree or not. It seems like you're braver than some in terms of having the difficult conversation, which actually leads you to getting past it and getting back to the work and not working from this like scared place. A lot of folks call this managing up. It seems like you're exceptional at that. And let me pause and let you react and tell me if you agree or disagree, or if that comes natural, if that's something that you've learned. But that's what this is. That's what managing up looks and feels like. It's having the difficult conversation, initiating it, not running from it, leaning into it, and then working through it eventually.
Yeah, it definitely does not come naturally. And it's funny to use the word manage up, because like even like my hackles come up a little bit in like, because I think there's like a negative connotation around managing up. It's funny, like one of the reasons I wanted to get into startups was because I don't like playing politics. And not even like, because I don't think most people like it. I don't think I'm good at it. And one of the things that I think a benefit of being at a company for a really long time was that it never felt like I was having to play politics with the founders, because I mean, we had been through the trenches together. And so I never viewed it as necessarily managing up, even though I think you're right. I think that would be the technical term for it. I viewed it as I have a boss who's never done this before, similar to me. And so it's my responsibility to help him understand kind of what great looks like, so that he can hold me to that bar, because that's what Amplitude needs. At every stage, Amplitude deserves to have the best VP product, chief product officer, and we should work together to define that. And the bravery to have those conversations and be vulnerable around that is certain. Like, I think I've learned that along the way. And I think I got some of the positive feedback early that reinforced that I should continue to build in this kind of build and have that kind of relationship.
Yeah, well, it's just really interesting because I'm hearing this and then comparing it to how we started our conversation, where you said, I'm from Iowa, everybody's so nice. My in-laws are also from the Midwest. And so I know what that looks like and what that feels like sometimes. So having difficult conversations, probably for other folks who are from the Midwest, feels a little uncomfortable maybe at first, or out of character, maybe not something you've practiced a whole lot. And that's where I was curious to know kind of where that came from. If that was something that was just in you personally, maybe being the oldest or something, or a skill that you've picked up, or maybe something you worked on with the mentor that you shared, or something else.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a skill that I picked up and seen the value of. It was not, like I would not say our household had healthy conflict resolution. It's so I think I've learned that from others.
And then you've also talked about how you pick up this mentor, CPO at Atlassian. How did you know what questions to ask your mentor? Because I think that there's a lot of folks who get mentors and then they don't really know how to leverage them best. And so I'm curious for you and for the listeners that are listening to this, how did you leverage them? How did you know what information you needed? Because you were entering an unknown, I guess, as the company grows. So I'm curious, like, how you manage that relationship.
I mean, I think I just brought forward a number of the like challenges that I felt like she had experience with. And so a number of them were around scale and how do you run a world-class product organization. And I think it worked well because I think Joff thought deeply about that topic. He's actually a sailor. And so he used the concept of the shipyard, and he really thought of the product organization as, if you think about your products as ships, your ships can only be as good as your shipyard. And that really resonated with me. And I think I was able to bring forward places where I was trying to experiment in what new could look like, and some of the mistakes that I was making along that as well. But I think he recognized that. And I think this is an important takeaway when finding an advisor, is it's a two-way conversation. So he was getting value out of that too, because I think he wanted to see, well, he's running a pretty large org. Like, what does it look like for a company that's only, 100 people, a much smaller organization? How are you pressing the boundaries and trying out new things? Like, I just read this book and I'm like, oh yeah, I actually literally tried like Shape Up. I was like, yeah, we just did our first like round of trying that out here. He's like, that's incredible. I wish I could do that. What did you learn? And so I think it went both ways. I think both of us were learning. And so I think that him seeing that early, it meant that, yeah, we were able to both see value and kind of build from there.
One of the other things I was just kind of noting was, again, my words, not yours, but the bravery I think it takes sometimes to initiate difficult conversations, or in your case, kind of talk about, I want to do what's best for the company, regardless if it's the best thing for me personally, which to me is what bravery looks like. And I'm curious for you, if there are other moments of bravery, or maybe other hard conversations in general that you've had, maybe as a leader. And if so, what were they? How'd you handle them?
I appreciate you calling out the ownership and that belief that like it's all about Amplitude and the mission, because I think that's something that's really important to me. And it's actually what made this moment really difficult when we actually went through a round of layoffs in Amplitude. That was an exceptionally hard moment for me, because I felt like I put so much of my heart and soul into Amplitude, and it was a real failure point as a leadership team, the fact that we had to go through that. And in particular, I had someone who had put a lot of trust into me to actually join Amplitude. They had been very successful at a larger tech company, similar, like they wanted to kind of join a smaller company. We were public at this time, so definitely not an early stage startup, but a smaller company. And I convinced them to come lead a new product area that we had kind of bootstrapped up. And so they took a risk. They were managing a team, they now be an IC, and they joined an exceptional person. We ended up pivoting, and eventually when it came time to actually think through where we were going to cut, it was obvious this was an area like that we would need to cut. And so even though this person was, in my opinion, an incredible leader, we just didn't have a seat at the table for them. And so I had to, lead them off, less than a year after them basically taking this huge career bet on me. And it was hard. It's very hard. I mean, like I said, they put their faith in me. And I remember our, the HR team, prepping for how we have these conversations, and it's all about like stick to the facts and things like that. And, in this conversation, I'm just like, I'm like, I basically just apologized, say, hey, this is on me. And I know how hard this was. And you deserve better than this. And they took it with grace. I told them I'm going to do everything to find them a new opportunity. Like, ultimately, I think they just, like, it was tough for them too. They just took the space. It was a hard one. It was one of those where I look back and I'm like, these are those tough moments in business. About a year later, we ended up catching coffee. Person's doing great. I think we were able to find closure in that. But that was a really hard moment for me.
Hey, if you're enjoying the stories on this show and feeling like you're ready to tackle some of your own hurdles, I'm here to help. If you didn't know already, I offer one-to-one coaching specifically for people who work on or around growth teams who want to have a bigger influence and impact in their roles. Maybe you're navigating some tough moments, whether it's managing your team or handling feedback. Maybe you just want to step into a bigger leadership role. Or maybe you're at a unicorn company today and you want to make sure that the company doesn't outgrow your skill set. Either way, I can help. If you're interested in learning a little bit more, head to deliveringvalue.co/coaching to learn a little bit more and set up a call with me to see if we jive. All right, enough from me. Back to the episode. And for those of us who aren't in those rooms, because you're on the leadership team, you know that layoffs are coming. How far in advance did you know in this case that you're going to have to make this tough decision or have this tough conversation as part of the layoff? Do you remember?
Not very far. It's one of those where we actually didn't think we were going to go through it. And I actually remember Spencer saying something that was true, but he ended up getting a lot of flack for afterwards, which was like at all hands. I think someone asked and he said, like, we currently do not have plans for a layoff. And then I think 6 weeks later we did. The reality was that was true. I think he'd deliver it differently now, but like it was true. So it happens fast. I think there was just a realization things were moving quickly. And there was a board meeting where we really got pressed from the board and we're playing through scenarios. And it basically, then we did an offsite and we came to that decision of like, actually the reality of like what we're seeing, like this does seem like it is the only path to avoid what could be a huge, risky later set of decisions. Because once you kind of realize you're on this path, the sooner you can do it, the better. And things have to move pretty quickly. And you don't get to involve a lot of people in it because obviously, like you don't want to have that information leak out. So it's very stressful, but not even close to the amount of stress you put the people through who actually end up getting laid off.
Of course. Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, I'm just exploring this from the angle of you as a human and as a leader. It's obviously a really tough position, right? There's a lot of folks who are listening to this, who are in leadership roles that are going through this or have just gone through this, whether it's because things have slowed down or maybe some of their team is made redundant from AI. It's really hard for both sides. Had you been through, as a leader, a layoff before this example that you're sharing with us?
I had not. Luckily, so I'd gone through the '08 downturn when I was at McKinsey, and actually all the partners in McKinsey basically just funded a pool to make sure that we could all stay there. I saw the like every week thinking, I get hired into McKinsey and then don't do any work for 4 months. I'm like, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out the economics of this isn't going to work out very well. But that was appreciative of that. So I had never actually been through this kind of situation before. I actually never even worked at a like real company, honestly. I don't consider McKinsey to be a real company. I had my own startups, consulting. So Amplitude was definitely the first public company I ever worked at.
So do you prep for that? Like, do you get like talk tracks? Like for you, do you like rehearse it beforehand? I'm just kind of curious on like the human and the leadership side of it, right? Because when you get promoted to becoming a leader and your team grows, all of a sudden you have all these things that it's your job to fix. And they're not necessarily things you've done before, you've been trained on. This is kind of one of those examples. So I'm curious for you, if you prepped in advance or you did things to kind of get in the right headspace for those.
Yeah. So certainly like the HR team will prep you on the like factual legal side, which is good to know. You don't want to like cross a boundary and say something that could lead to a lawsuit. But like, that's not the human like leadership side. And so I did this with my advisor. And so I think one of the reasons why I'm now advising is because I think it's just a great place where you can have someone that you fully trust, that you can have these conversations with, and has gone through them before, and can actually role play out what the discussions will look like. And yeah, and I think that's something I do. I'm an introvert. I actually do a lot of that role playing. And so it was helpful for me. It's nothing like when you're actually in the room with the person because just emotions are high. But I do think it's important to at least play through some of those conversations.
I love that you did that. I've done that. Like, I've had coaches at different points in my career for different things. And I've done a lot of the role playing. And I feel like the first time you do it, you're like, this is stupid. This is like what you do when you're like, I don't know, in sixth grade or whatever. And then you do it once or twice and you're like, oh, this is actually really helpful because now I've worked out the kinks. The first time you do anything, you don't know what you're doing. It doesn't feel good. You're nervous. You make all the silly mistakes. And then you get a little bit of feedback and maybe you do 2 practice runs and this two game reps, to use your sports analogy. So I love that. I have found it to be a very helpful tool in my life as well, in many different circumstances.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And like I said, I think that's where an advisor can be really helpful because they can be a sounding board. Same thing with if you have a significant other, friends, like I definitely encourage people. I know that you're nervous, you think it'll be messy, lean into that. That's the whole point. They can help you work through the messiness.
And so we talked about this example and the role playing and things like that. Have there been other examples for you as a leader, as an exec, where there have been other difficult conversations, whether you've had to role play for them or not, that you've worked through?
Yeah, for sure. As an introvert, I remember I had a partner at McKinsey who was also an introvert. And most people at McKinsey are extroverts. Most people even assume that I'm an extrovert, which is funny. I think it's just like a requirement of the job as an exec, but it is a learned skill. But this partner, he actually did a 60-minute class on how to be a successful leader as an introvert, which I loved. And one of the things that I really took away from that was he would prepare for all meetings ahead of time, even at this super senior stage. And it was so great to see someone who is like the leader of the office. I'm like, oh, I could never be like this person. I've seen them the talks they give, and I'm just like, and then you're like, no, actually they're just like me. Yeah. They work behind the scenes. They prepare for these hard conversations. They literally write down notes. I eventually ended up working on a case with him, which was great. And I mentioned this and how impactful it was to me. He's like, awesome. Next conversation we're going to have with the client, we're going to actually role play it out 30 minutes before. I will spend the time. We'll carve it out. And so, but I want to see how you do this. And then he coached me on how I thought about the role playing and the notes that I would take. And then we actually practiced things that I would say in the room. And he would lean in to help call on me to get me more comfortable when he knew I had a point, because we talked about it prior to the session. And just once again gave me a lot more confidence in myself to actually lean in, say the thing that I felt needed to be said, and helped me understand that I viewed my introvertism as a flaw. And he helped me understand that actually it's a superpower, because I can observe the things that other people aren't observing. But if I don't say it in the room, then I'm wasting it. That was just a huge mindset shift for me. Since then, I've always, whenever talk about weaknesses, strengths, I've come to this realization that every superpower has a dark side to it. Every strength has a corresponding weakness to it. No one's perfect. We're all kind of learning, but lean into your strengths versus don't overly worry about your deficiencies. And so I think that advice really helped me realize that.
I think there's a lot of folks who feel like if they do that kind of preparation before a big meeting, that they're performing and it feels too performative for them. And they're like, well, we already know what we're both going to say type of thing. Why are we still doing it? But in my experience, typically that's just what high performance looks like. It looks like being very prepared. How do you prepare? You run through this different scenarios beforehand. You think through your talk tracks. You put a bunch of FAQs that maybe people will ask you, so that if they do ask, you're not going to be caught off guard. And that reduces 85% of the stuff that could go wrong just by a little bit of preparation. And for whatever reason, I feel like a lot of folks, at least folks who I talk to, are hesitant to do that, or they feel like doing that isn't what the person they look up to or aspire to be does. And so it's cool to hear you say the person who you aspired to be taught you how to do that, showed you the code.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the thing. Like I said, the realization that these people that look super senior, scary, amazing, they're just the same as you.
Yeah.
They're learning, they prepare. Certainly, they could probably do less preparation than maybe I was doing because they've been doing it, but that's the homework that they were doing. And I found this for myself. With all that preparation, it lets you then spend more time thinking about how to run a meeting successfully. What are the unsaid things in the meeting? Because you've already thought through many of the types of questions. So you can start to observe the things that actually make conversations really valuable. Why we bring people together. You can observe that, oh, it's actually interesting that like Aaron hasn't said anything today. If you're so busy worried about what you're going to say next, you may miss that. And that's an opportunity to pull them in. And I've found that those folks who are really quiet in meetings, like if you pull them in, similar to when they pulled me in, like they actually have really great observations that can create new levels of focus.
I'm curious if there's been a time that you can remember where all of a sudden you're in a meeting and something happens that's difficult that you weren't prepared for.
Yeah, for sure. I think back at early days at Amplitude, actually, I think the early time for us around having a leadership team, I think we'd recently formed a team. One of my peers, unbeknownst to me, has been having a lot of issues with me and had not brought this up to me, but has definitely brought it up to the CEO of the company. And I think a learning moment for the CEO as well. We've joked about this afterwards, but he decides that the best way to work through this is that he'll actually bring this up in the room. There's 5 or 6 of us. And I kind of feel like I'm getting ambushed a bit.
Wait. So do you know in advance? Did he give you a heads up like, hey, in this meeting? No.
No heads up.
Oh, no.
She's not talked to me about it. I have been oblivious to the conflict as well, which, hey, that's on me too. I should probably be able to get better senses of that. But yeah, it caught me off guard. We'll just put it that way. And it felt like, I don't know, it felt like a reality TV show where we have like an audience of people and a grievance is being brought up against me.
And so what happens? Without sharing anything that's going to out the person or share anything that you're going to regret saying publicly, like what's the grievance? And then how does the CEO bring it? Like, I just want to go back to the moment where you're in the meeting, probably leaning back in your chair, figuring you're going to talk about the normal stuff you talk about in the meeting. And then all of a sudden you start to realize the meeting's going in a different direction. Just want to see if you can bring us to that moment.
Yeah. So he fairly directed it. He basically laid out that this person has had conflict with you, and I'd like the two of you. And he said, and I'd like you, the other person, to bring up your issue with Justin right now. And so I don't know if they were quite prepared as well for how that was going to get prompted. And I'll say, this is the fun of working with, first-time founders who are 23, 24 years old. We're all learning on the job.
Yeah. And probably some advisor told them like, well, just let him work it out, but like to apply that information in a specific way.
Exactly. And so I am I'm flushing at this stage. Maybe this is one of those moments where it's helpful to be an introvert because I'm just running through every single possible thing I could say. And I'm like, okay, I'm just going to take in the feedback, not be defensive, and just absorb and ask questions. And honestly, candidly, try to get out of the situation as fast as I can. Because I just don't think this is the right place for us to hash this out. Clearly, there is an issue. I mean, if you have got someone who's on your team who has conflict with you, there's the thing there. But this is probably not the right place for that to be hashed out. And so I am trying as hard as I can to think through, after learning and hearing, how can I gracefully get an exit from this.
And is that the whole meeting? Or is it like y'all work through this thing and then it's like, all right, well, Andrew, give us the weekly numbers. Like, would you just go on to the normal business meeting after that?
Yes. I think someone else on the team who also recognized who had more experience was like, I think we should take a break. So luckily, kind of once it got to conclusion, we had a bit of that break. And then I did share feedback with Spencer later that day. We're still early in us building our relationship. So it's not the we're super tight moments that we talked about earlier. This was probably one of those moments that helped build that and kind of walk through just how I was feeling. Because I didn't want him to feel like I was defensive about the feedback or anything like that. Just the more me being caught by surprise.
Right.
And just helping him see where that put me emotionally. And I think he appreciated that, because I mean, he was like, he did not realize that would happen.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I was curious to know if that came home with you after work, if that was like one of those things that you're just like, fuck, that was crazy the way that played out. And you stay up at night thinking about it. Like, to me, putting myself in that position, I think I probably would have replayed it a bunch of times and needed to talk it out, or else I would probably get stuck on it. So I don't want to project, but I just was curious if you went through any flavor of that.
Yeah. And I think it was lucky it was an offsite. I think if that happened just in like a weekly leadership team meeting, I don't know if I would have actually talked to Spencer until probably later that week, maybe when we had our one-on-one or something like that. And it would have sat with me for a really long time. And so I think the fact that we were all together, I felt like, okay, I really do need to share this, even though it was hard. And like I said, I saw all the landmines. Like this could go really wrong if he thinks that means I don't think the feedback was warranted, or like. But I also understood that if I didn't get that off my chest, I don't think I would have been able to be fully there for the rest of the offsite.
Yeah, it's almost like a blessing and a curse that you're at an offsite. The blessing is that you don't get stuck on it. The curse is that you have nowhere to hide, right? It's not like you could just disappear for a night, take a day off, claim you have a doctor's appointment, but just go somewhere and, work out or whatever you need to do to kind of process stuff. So I think there's pros and cons to that.
For sure. I think for me, as someone who, like, my upbringing is much more conflict avoidant, I think it forced me to lean in to what was awkward in having that conversation with him. And once again, it was like one of those moments that taught me that is the right thing to do.
So throughout our conversation, we've talked about kind of leading into some of these tough moments, as you were just saying, that might not have felt supernatural to an earlier version of yourself. I'm curious if there's been like a mindset ritual or a habit or something else that's made a big impact on your job and as your career and as you've progressed in leadership and in tech. What comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I think this realization that every 18 months you're going to be in a new role, and to deeply think about what that means and have a real clear North Star of what that is. I think that's something that I've learned. And then I think the habit I've built around that is, how do you create the time to do that? I really appreciate this advice from Spencer when he would say, like, I want you to go and really think about this. Like, don't give me your answer right now. I actually want you to go really deeply think about this. And I don't think as leaders, many leaders, and I see this even in my own advisory work, spend enough time carving out deep thinking time. And it's hard. I get it. You're a startup. Things are moving fast. So many fires. But as a leader, understanding what's urgent versus important and making sure you get the important decisions right, I think that is your job. You're the only person that can have that level of visibility to really realize that. And so one of the habits is that explicit focus time. And I think about that at an annual, quarterly, and weekly level. So on an annual basis, you might be familiar with like the Bill Gates Think Week.
It's funny. I was thinking about, you're familiar with Matt Machari. He's got the top goal time. He wrote the book, The Great CEO Within. That's where my head initially went. I assume Bill Gates has a similar philosophy.
It's basically, yeah. So his philosophy was he would take a week, he would bring 3 books, and he would read those 3 books and just deeply think about his life, business. And you get a lot of clarity through that with no distractions. It's been hard to do that now that I have a kid, but prior to that, I was pretty religious about it. So I'd have the week. And I honestly felt like that week was one of the most productive weeks. Quarterly offsite for myself. So just one day where I'm just like, okay, I'm just gonna take this to myself and think about what are my personal goals, what are my family goals. My wife would I'd try to see if she could take that day off too. And so then we could do that, but then also carve out time for myself. And then my Sunday morning run where I'm not listening to music. I'm literally just going on a 10, 12 mile run, and you just got your head to think about. And I've always found in those runs that there's some epiphany, something that just randomly, I don't even know what it will be, but something will just randomly come up that I will chew on and have an answer to.
So former CPO at Amplitude, currently advising a bunch of different companies in the AI space. You didn't have to come on here and shine a light on some of these moments that could have been left unsaid. Why in the world did you say yes to come on and share a few of the speed bumps and, in adversity in your career?
I'm here because other people have done the same. They've shared their learnings. They've shared the hardships they've gone through. When you're young, you see successful people and you think they're always that way. It was easy for them. Doesn't look like me. And that's actually not true. And as much as I can share my story, I think can help other people see that, we're all human. We're all learning together. Everyone's trying to get better. And you do that by leaning on each other. This is a small role I can play and help do that.
And is there anything that you haven't said that you want the listeners to this episode to take away or to learn from your journey?
I mean, I think that was the main thing, which is that we're all going through struggles, challenges, and the best thing that you can do is to lean on others as part of that. Find your tribe, find your advisor, find your network of people who really the only thing that matters to them is you. They have no other agenda. They're just there to help you be better. Don't be shy about that. Look for those folks.
Dude, thank you for coming on and sharing your journey and some of the game here. For those who are following that want to connect with you, want you to be that person for them, but work at a startup that want your guidance, where should we send them? How do they get a hold of you?
Yeah. So LinkedIn's probably the easiest one. You can hit me up there. I'm not really that active on Twitter. And so probably LinkedIn is the best place. Justin Bauer, pretty easy to find me.
Cool. We'll put links to all that stuff in the show notes. Thanks for coming on, dude.
Yeah, of course. This is a lot of fun. Thanks for having me, Andrew.